Earlier, I had discussed why it's really important to look at per capita rates on maps, not just total counts, because for the most part, if you're counting something that's dependent on population size, your count map is going to look very similar to your just general population map. It's not going to tell you anything new that you didn't know before. So I'd like to take that conversation one step further, which is how do you determine what the correct denominator should be for a value that you're looking at? In other words, how do you know if you should look at something per capita or perhaps by a different rate or comparison? We're going to do this by looking at how different the results can be for ostensibly the same value depending on what you are comparing it to. It all started when I saw this map, which shows anti-Semitic incidents by state. And it caught my eye because, again, typically these just general counts reflect population. But my home state, Colorado, stood out to me. It's not one of the largest states in terms of population, but it did end up in that top group for number of anti-Jewish hate crimes. And so I wanted to understand a bit more deeply, was this actually an outlier? Which meant, of course, that I needed to look at a per capita rate. So I took the raw total numbers, joined them with the state population data, divided them out to get a per 100,000 population rate. So now I could break these into quintiles, meaning 5 equal groups of states. So those in the highest quintile have the highest per capita rate, and those in the lowest 5th quintile have the lowest rate. And I can see when I do this that, again, Colorado still stands out, right? It has a high proportion of anti-Jewish hate crimes, even when I adjust for the fact that it has a much smaller population than, say, California or New York, which before had high rates as well. But we continue to see that those big population states are still dominating the overall rate. So as I was looking at this and pondering what this could mean, I realized that total population isn't, in fact, the most accurate denominator I could use, right? It's not the most accurate comparison group. Because if you're not Jewish, then you're not going to be subject to an anti-Jewish hate crime. So really, a much better thing to look at would be to look at hate crimes per total Jewish population of a state. Now, the picture looks very different. Completely different states are coming to the top as having the highest number of anti-Jewish hate crimes when we compare it per total 10,000 Jews who live in that state. So we've changed the denominator or full picture of our population from everyone who lives in the state to just those who might be subject to these particular crimes. So now we might be thinking, oh, okay, so actually it's not, Colorado that has one of the highest rates. It's a place like Utah or Nebraska or Arkansas. But there's another problem here when I look at this. Virtually every state that is in that top quintile has a very small population of Jews. So maybe what's happening here isn't the fact that these have significantly and measurably higher rates. It's just that they have very, very few Jews. And so a single extra hate crime increases their rate substantially. Whereas conversely, they had just one fewer, maybe their overall rate would drop substantially. So whenever we see very small populations that we're looking at, we always have to be aware that that can really affect what the final rates are going to look like. Now, another possibility is that places that have very few Jews aren't very tolerant of Jews. Maybe that's why they don't have very many Jews, or conversely, maybe they're not tolerant of them because they aren't exposed to very many Jews. So it's difficult just from looking at this map, knowing whether the big differences we see in the per population rates versus the just per Jewish population rates are an artifact of the small sample size that we have, or if they're actually explaining something. The whole point of this exercise is to show how different what is seemingly the same thing, right? Hate crimes by state. How much different information we can get when we compare it in different ways. So the next time that you see a map that's purporting to show, states that are very high in something and states that are very low in something, think about, is this the right reference population? Is there even a reference population? Or are we looking at total numbers, which again, we get down to the population problem? How else might we need to look at this to really understand what's going on? And that should lead you then to what question are we actually trying to answer? If we're trying to assign, hate crime caseworkers by state, then the raw number is actually what we need. If we're trying to figure out that there are states that are very tolerant of Jews or states that are very intolerant of Jews, and we're using hate crimes as a measure of this, then we are going to need to adjust for population in some way. And the question becomes, should you adjust by total population or by Jewish population? So you need to know what question you're trying to ask and what information you really need so that you can pick exactly the most effective and insightful measure.